I was a letter carrier for almost 9 years, and I was working two jobs. I worked two full-time jobs. I would deliver mail during the day, and in the evenings, I would work for the city of Buffalo at the Colonel Ward pumping station at the foot of Porter Avenue. And then finally, I decided that I was tired of working two jobs. I was hardly seeing my children. They'd be going to school, I'd be going to work. I would try to come home for dinner with them and then go back to work. So it was difficult. And then I wanted to see them they were going to start to play ball, and I wanted to be with them. So I took the supervisor's test for the Postal Service, and I passed the test, and I was given a job as a postal supervisor, and eventually became a manager. Became a program manager, and I retired after 40-some years with the Postal Service, which was, for me, was a good thing. It was a good job. I got to spend time with my children and grow up with my children, and to be with my family more than I would if I had to work two jobs for most of my life. I was the coordinator or the program manager for the Western New York District, creating the 9-digit zip code for the Western New York District. It was a national program that began in the late 80s when the Postal Service decided to turn into automation, where barcode readers and optical character readers, barcode readers, would now begin to sort the mail. So every time you get a letter now, you see a little barcode on there. Well, we're the ones that put together the database for for that program. I'm retired. I've been retired for the Postal Service since 2006, and I thought my goal when I retired was that I'm going to play more golf, and I'm just going to sit around and read all the books that I've acquired, and that never seemed to happen, at least for reading the books. I do get an opportunity to play golf, but I involve my life now in the Prise magazine, which I started in 2005. It started out as a newsletter, and it became very popular. It was only a 2-page newsletter at the time. It developed from then, which is 19 years ago, into a full-fledged magazine today, which has over 600 subscribers. It comes out quarterly, 4 times a year. But it's an effort to put that magazine together, and it's really almost like a job. All the money that's generated from that magazine through donations and the magazine itself goes to help the poor people in our community, mostly refugees, people who've fallen through the cracks. We ask no questions. If they're in help, we do that. So 16 years ago or 19 years ago when we started, with only about 25 or 30 subscribers or members of the Prise Club, we generated about $200 that year to give to a family that was in need around Christmas time. Well, since then, that was 19 years ago. This year, we have over 600 subscribers, and last year we spent over $49,000 helping people who needed stoves, refrigerators, beds, help with tuition, help with rental, whatever they need at the time. My wife and I are there. We vet them, we interview them, we see what they need, and we make sure that they get it.
I was born on 7th Street in West Side, and I went to Holy Cross School, and I didn't know there was anything but Italians, because that's all there was Italians. I worked, I volunteered a lot, and that's where Joe got his volunteering from. My son, Frank, was in 3rd grade, and one of the teachers, one of the nuns, was looking for somebody to help some children in a classroom that had problems with reading. I think it was like 4 kids. So I did that first class, and I loved it. I was like soaring. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And then the 1st grade teacher needed an aide. So I volunteered my time doing that, and I would go up to the library and bring, little groups of kids for reading. And the principal came, and she would come up in the library where I was, and she would, mull around and whatever. And I thought she was just, looking for books or whatever. And finally she said, if you go back to school, I will pay you. She said, I think you'll be a great teacher. So I went home and I said to Joe, I have 4 kids now, 4 little kids. And I said, I'd like to go back to school. And he said, okay. So I did. I said, well, I'll take 1 class at Madai. If I could do it, and I do well, and I like it, I'll do it. Joe was going to college at the time. He was taking night courses. I was working at school and taking night courses. And we'd sit around the table every night. We all have our homework. We sit at our dining room table. I would do my homework. Joe would do his homework. My 4 kids would do their homework. And the school that I was at was where my 4 kids were. So in the morning, I'd get up and all of us would go to school. And at that time, you'd go home for lunch. So we'd all come home for lunch. And then we'd go back to school 45 minutes later and then all come home together. And then I was hired actually as a first grade teacher. And my degree would be as a reading diagnostic specialist. So when I graduated with my master's, my son Frank graduated with his bachelor's, and my son Lou graduated at the same time with his associates. So we were all wearing our gowns together. So that was pretty cool.
And I was still going to night school.
And he was still going to night school. And then I was asked to be assistant principal, and then I became principal. I was principal at St. Margaret's School for 10 years.
To go back to school as a volunteer, to begin as a teaching volunteer, and with over a period of time to wind up becoming the principal of that school, that was something I think that she should really be proud of.
And then after I retired after the 10 years, because by then I had like 8 grandkids, and I wanted to watch them all play ball, and there was never any time. I was always in school or meetings and whatever. So I decided to retire. Joe was already retired. I was only retired maybe 2 months and met Mrs. Jacoby because Joe was helping her with a computer program because she wanted to do. He could tell you that story, but I used to go over there with Joe, and she would say, "That's all I want to do is teach. I don't want to send out letters. I don't want to do anything. Anything, the office work or whatever." I said, "Well, I just retired. I'll be glad to send out letters. That's something I could do." So she became very ill, and all of a sudden she said, "Okay, this is yours." And that's how I started with CCI, and I've been there ever since.
My parents both came to this country in 1906 from Sicily. They came as children. I was born on the Lower West Side behind City Hall. This was in the early, maybe 1920 or so. We lived in that building until 1956. We lived on the 4th floor. We had no hot water, no bathtub, no furnace. Our cousins lived across the hall. They had 3 rooms, we had 4. My grandmother and grandfather lived on the 3rd floor in 2 rooms. Another cousin lived on the 3rd floor, and then my uncle and aunt who owned the building lived on the 2nd floor. The neighborhood was not a typical residential type neighborhood. It was actually a commercial neighborhood right on the cusp of downtown Buffalo. There were buildings and there were little apartments in between, apartment houses. Actually, they were called probably tenement homes. Again, we lived on that 4th floor, and the rest of the family was structured throughout the building. My uncle owned the restaurant on the bottom floor. It was called Andy's Cafe. It was a popular Italian restaurant at the time. We moved to Lower Busty Avenue, where I spent the remainder of my teenage years there. That's where I met my wife. Not in that neighborhood, but I was friends with her uncle, who lived a block away. We became friends, and at a family dinner on a Sunday afternoon, I was at the home, and sitting across from me was this 15-year-old girl that caught my eye. We've been married for 58 years, and we went together for 3 years before we got married. Unfortunately, I was a few years older than her. I was almost probably 7 years older. I was 22 and she was 15 when we met. My father-in-law did not like that at all. So in the beginning, but her mother did. She liked me, and we were able to meet when my father-in-law was not at home. Till eventually one night he came home early, and he seen me there, and that was it. He blew a stack. I left, and my wife was kind of upset. And I did stay away for about a week or 2 until I made the decision, look, I have to go back. We have to have a talk. So I did. I went back to the home. I sat with him and my wife, and we talked. And he just listened, and he looked, the one thing he looked at my wife and he said, "Don't you ever do anything to embarrass me." And that was it. And right after that, we became friends. We became accepted. And within a short time, a year after that, we got engaged and we got married. But on the day before the night before the wedding, Her family came to her.
My aunt.
Her aunt came to her and said, you could change your mind now. I'll send you away to college. You could go away to college. 4 years, all expenses paid. You can walk away.
Just don't get married.
Just don't get married. And she didn't take her advice. And we're still here. So I guess it was a challenge. And I could picture myself being in that situation right now. If I had a young daughter like that, I would not like that at all. But I probably was 22 going on 16. Maturity was not one of my strong points in those days.
Still is not, no. We used to go to CYO dances at Holy Angels Church. And, all of a sudden my uncle and his group of friends would come to the dance, and they would come for an hour or so, whatever, and then they would go to bars. I had to go home. I was young, I was a kid. And I never understood why they would come for dances. And then all of a sudden, he would ask me to dance. And, people, everybody asked everybody to dance, whatever. And there was some guy there that wanted to ask me to go steady, and I was dancing with Joe, and I said, could I just say that I'm going with you? And, I didn't want to hurt this guy's feelings. He was such a nice guy. And he goes, oh, sure. And so after that, I don't know, it just happened.
Well, it just didn't happen. But my father-in-law was strict, and she had to be home by a certain time every night. If it was during the week, 9 o'clock. On weekends, it could be 10 o'clock. So sometimes we wanted to catch a show. We never could catch a full show. If we would go to a 7 or 8 o'clock show, and it's the ending could have been like around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, we were out. I had to go bring her back home again. We could never see the end of the movie. But then it started to soften up. We became, I can't say great friends, but he did start to like me, maybe because of my mother-in-law. Then when we got married, then things really started to get a lot better. And once the grandchildren came along, well, that was it. He was hooked on them. So now her aunt, the one who said, don't get married, I'll send you off to college. She's still alive. She's 94 years old now. And she keeps, every time she sees me, she says, oh my God, what a mistake that was. I'm so glad that you and Toni got married.
We have 10 grandchildren, and we're going on our 3rd great-grandchild. But we still have family dinners. There's 22 of us, give or take 1 or 2. And sometimes we have friends that come over, and they have friends that come over. So it's always a big deal on Sunday. I don't cook. My son and my daughter-in-law do the cooking. I bring dessert. And,
It's a loud and boisterous afternoon.
It sure is.
It is. Anybody can show up,
Oh,
and no
I know.
one is ever turned away. Just slide another chair
chair.
to the table, and there you are. Toni's mom and my mom came from the little same town in Sicily. It was called Monteloro. Her grandmother and my grandmother's maiden name were Albas. Our maternal grandfather's last name was Licata. And we never thought too much about it. I mean, we knew the family, and we were not close with them at all. And when we did our DNA a few years ago, we put our DNA in, and it was determined at that time. My friend who did put the program together with us, he said, "Did you know that you and Toni are 4th cousins?"
Well, we did find out when we did visit Italy that my grandmother and his grandmother lived across the street from each other.
Yeah, we went to that town.
So, it's a strange thing that now here we are in Buffalo, New York, after all of this time, and we meet and we're together.
And they came at different times. My mom came in 1906. Her mother came in 1927. When I retired, I said, I need to stay active. I'm going to take a language, Italian language. So I asked, Mrs. Jacoby was teaching at Buff State at the time, and I asked her if I could audit her classes. She said, sure. So I audited 101, 102, 201, 202, and then I would repeat it again. 101, 102, 201, I kept going. So after Mrs. Jacoby retired, they opened up a storefront on Hurdle Avenue to start Italian lessons. It was a small, so they only had maybe 20 or 25 people taking lessons, and maybe a beginner's or an intermediate lesson. So I realized that she needed some help creating some type of database. So that was my expertise at the time, and I told her that I would help her, and I did. And I would go to her house, set up a database program for her, and told her how she had to renew the memberships. And I would bring my wife with me. And together at her home, we began creating the management program initially for it wasn't even called a cultural center at the time, was it? I think it was just called Italian lessons. And my wife said, Mrs. Jacoby started to get sick. And her son called us, asked if we would come over, he wanted to talk to us, and he said, my mom's getting sick, would you guys take over? And my wife said, sure, we would do that. And from that time on, Toni now is actually, as she said, the manager of education and the membership committee at the Cultural Center.
Membership has soared tremendously from 186 to 1,749 as of today. And our classes are just busting at the seams. So we've done very well.
I'm heavily involved with them also because where she goes, she takes me along with her. And Joe, you got to pick this up or you got to do that. So I'm actively involved with them also. And I'm still taking lessons after all these years. So it's an ongoing experience for us. It keeps us busy. We're not at home all day on the couch watching TV or anything like that. We're always involved in the Cultural Center, helping these the people that we go out through the magazine, through the Preneti Club. So we're quite active. Io sono stanco, voglio andare a casa perché io voglio andare a letto.
Which means?
I'm tired. I want to go home. I want to go to bed. When we're someplace and I want to start to go, that's it.
And I say, just give me 5 more minutes.
You know, life is like a book. You have to look at it like that. There are certain parts in the beginning and when you do different things. When I look at something now, I have to realize that I'm looking something as an 80-year-old man and not as a 20 or 25-year-old thing. So I got to realize that I can't be too critical of things that my grandchildren may be doing that I may not approve of, or my children or whatever. It's something that they have to learn, because if I was that age, I was probably doing things that may be worse than I think what they were doing now. But you get to grow and you get to learn. And I think when you do look back, it's like looking through a rearview mirror in your car, you know? The rearview mirror is this small. You're looking through that. But look ahead with the front window, which is much more bigger. There's much more of a future. So I think what I like to always tell my friends, and which we've been together for many years, guys that I grew up with, we played baseball with, basketball, and golf. We were 16 at one time playing golf every 3 or 4 times a week. Now we're down to only 2 that's left, either who are sick, who can't do it anymore, who have passed away. But I think my goal is to grow old to live and not to grow old to die.